Welcome to Celebrating the Future, Arts Leaders Look Forward. I'm Kevin Kwan, Loucks, CEO of Chamber Music America. Thank you to our incredible CMA members for joining us from across the country today, and a warm welcome to our distinguished guests. This panel comes on the heels of a regional event that just concluded last weekend, Chamberfest Boston, which was a really powerful forum for conversation, connection, and collaboration at New England Conservatory. And we're so thrilled to keep that momentum going today. Today's discussion is a celebration of that very same spirit, an opportunity to hear from visionary leaders who are helping to shape what comes next for our field. We'll be talking about sustainability, community engagement, data and storytelling, and cross-sector collaboration. We'll also have a Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat. We'll be monitoring that. Thank you again for being with us. And let's dive in. Let's talk about sustainability. I'd love to ask this panel, what does sustainability look like in your organization's context, and how has it evolved over the past 5 years? Marna, why don't you start?
Hi, everybody. So happy to be here, and thank you, Kevin. Um, I would say that sustainability in this context cannot just be about financial solvency. Of course, that's really important, but I think it has to be about relevance, resilience, relationships. And I believe that the organizations that thrive are those that become essential to the fabric of their communities, and not just culturally, but socially and emotionally. Chamber music feels like it's sustainable when it's a tool for connection and meaning making and not just performance. There's so many things that I think about when thinking about sustainability.
Actually, you might want to listen to this.
The relationship with the audience, listening, over curating, doing a lot with a little, it's one of the things I really appreciate about chamber music. It feels like it's one of the hallmarks of the art form, that it's portable and it's flexible, and the field is filled with artists who are looking for opportunities, and even the smallest organizations can have a huge impact. I think excellence is really, really important. I know sometimes it gets tricky to talk about that, but excellence in the service of community impact. And I would say also not being afraid to break the rules or not following the rules, making sure that you do what's right for your community. One of my favorite kind of silly examples is that early on in my career, one of the first things that I did was work in a management firm where I was selling artists to people like me, to presenters. And one of my clients was in Caribou, Maine, which is about as far north as you can get before you get into Canada. And it was a potato farming community. And I don't think they had a lot of daylight. So students went to school when it was light out, or they farmed potatoes when it was light out, and they went to school when it was darker. And then the concert series was scheduled around that schedule, so when there was no potato farming, there was concerts. And I know that that's sort of a silly example, but I do think as arts organizations, we have to be that responsive to our communities. And every community obviously looks different. So that's general. Happy to go into details, but that's just general thoughts about sustainability.
Thank you. Oskar, how about you? What does sustainability look like in your organization's context, plural, because I know that you're involved in a lot.
Yes. So let's put on the Music Mountain Summer Festival hat on. And something very interesting. I mean, I think that we all can answer this question in part by looking back 3-4 years with the pandemic, right? And the first reaction to remain sustainable during a crisis was to become leaner. But very, very quickly, much more than become leaner, in my view, what we did was to collaborate and actually to think outside of the box and just look around us and what can we do with what we have, kind of going to the grassroots. So in my opinion, that way of becoming sustainable is the most important way to be sustainable. In fact, I mean, we learn lessons that we can apply even to times when, that we may have, a lot of donations, a lot of grants, a lot of ticket revenue. I mean, to think outside of the box and be very creative is important always. So yeah, for sustainability, think hard, think outside of the box, and collaborate. See what you can do with your neighbors. That would be my recommendation and what we have done, and what, looking back, I mean, I see others have done successfully. I would just share my 2 cents like that.
Thank you. Drew, how about you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important is making sure that we find the value in our programming that is separate from the dollars, right? So what are we doing after an artist gets their funding? How are we supporting them? One of the things that we try to do at Jazz Road is really work hard on creating an alumni network, much like a university would, and just doing what we can to keep them all as connected as possible, keep them in an ecosystem, create areas for them to be able to collaborate and for them to be able to use their resources to help each other. So much like what Oskar was saying, that nature and that spirit of collaboration. I mean, how nice is it to know after, for example, filling out an application, being awarded this application, sort of, I guess, for lack of a better term, being vetted as an artist who takes their work at the very least seriously enough to be awarded one of these grants, to then have this sort of ecosystem where you're speaking to other artists who had to go through the same thing, who already are very serious about their art, who understand certain things based on whatever that grant happens to be. For us, it's they understand how to tour. So if you're saying, man, I'm in California, I'm trying to build this or build that, well, somebody else might have already done this in California and then can share it. And this seems like something that is relatively simple, but goes such a long way if we're consistent about it in taking those who've maybe been awarded some grants and helping them to build community, teaching them how to build community. In a lot of areas, music, especially if you came up in certain environments, can be very competitive, and sort of changing that paradigm from being something where there's a scarcity mindset to something where there's a mindset of abundance, that we all have certain gifts and experiences to bring to this music, to bring to this art. And if we can all embrace each other's unique confluence of gifts in terms of this art, instead of being competitive, realizing that the only way forward is going to be together, because really we're all we got.
We were talking a little bit before the panel started, and you can't think about sustainability without really addressing the challenges that our field is facing right now. And so I have a general question to the panel, and then of course we can bring in recent news and some happenings that are really affecting the landscape for all of us. But to the panel, in what ways have you seen funding models or philanthropic relationships kind of change, evolve, and transform, particularly post-COVID? And of course, with the news of the NEA and a lot of grants being rescinded, I'm curious where you see it moving to after that. Drew, why don't we start with you and go backwards?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's going to be so important moving forward, and speaking especially to what we're dealing with now, because COVID feels like so long ago right now, especially it didn't feel that long ago until the last 5 months, which have felt like 4 years. So from an arts granting standpoint, so just thinking about that and thinking about what's going to be valuable moving forward is for artists is going to be artists having the skill to be able to communicate their value to various different stakeholders, because the money hasn't disappeared. It's just being recirculated, it's being reallocated, being put into different areas, and you're still going to have the need for arts, for entertainment. So the question is going to be, well, if you have this wonderful 4-piece chamber mixed multidisciplinary work, can you speak about it in a way that doesn't just say how great your work's going to be and how impactful it's going to be to other artists or to yourself, but how is this going to affect the community? And understanding what different types of grants there are, first of all, right? So there are local grants, there's national grants. Obviously, we have, national, you have your regional arts organizations, your state level grants, you have your larger funders that are like your Knight Foundation or your Doris Duke Foundation, et cetera. And then, of course, you have your government grants, your larger government grants like the NEA. But there are so many different levels, and each of those different grantors or the different grant levels have different priorities. And their priorities, even if they are giving out a couple $1 million in art funding, their priorities are still to their constituents, which are going to be looking for things like better property values, safer streets, tourism, et cetera, things like that. So the practice, I feel, is going to be to be able to communicate that to people who don't understand your music, right? To I guess you'd say lay people, right? And then also, and one way to practice that is to just fill out grants, to go look for grants and fill them out as a practice. Even if you don't have even if you're not going to win, or you think that this might not be right in your lane, being able to hear questions about what can your music do for X, Y, or Z that you haven't thought about yet is only going to expand your capacity to be able to communicate that in the future. And another way to practice that is start telling your projects talking about your project to people who aren't musicians, to your grandmother, to your grandkids. You know, you got 12 to your kids, to your 15-year-old kid who might not understand what's happening, or to just a friend while you're out at your mommy and me group, or whatever the case may be, and say, hey, here's what we're trying to do, and communicate it in a way that they can understand it. Because I think as we move forward in this current climate, it's going to be more and more important to be able to communicate the value of your artistic project to people who don't understand your artistic merit and intention.
You know, what you're talking about, the storytelling element, came up a lot in Boston at our panel. We had Mr. Michael Bobbitt, the executive director of Mass Cultural Council there, one of the most important arts funders in the state. And he has a strong relationship with Mayor Wu of Boston, who's a big art supporter, classical pianist herself. And Mayor Wu had mentioned to Michael, I'm not feeling a ton of pressure from advocacy groups, from musicians, from freelancers. I'm not hearing from the arts groups. They're not organizing, they're not advocating for their needs in a really distinct way. And it was just a point that Michael was saying to the group in Boston, that we have to learn how to talk about what we do more effectively on a human level, so that people really understand the value and that they want to continue their investment. And it's really along the lines of what you just said, Drew. Oskar, how about you? What do you notice?
Yeah, many things. I mean, following what I noticed at Music Mountain is that we really have started to collaborate with local organizations. We started a winter series. We started a piano recital series. We continue to develop Chamber Fest. I mean, we really are trying to see what we have to offer. I mean, this is maybe a different situation, right? From what, for example, Drew was saying, but it's the same thing. I mean, different in that it is a 96-year-old organization, right? So it has a long following of people who have been coming to the concerts for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and so on. So that might be a little bit more helpful where we are, but we continue to look for ways to collaborate. Otherwise, we really don't have enough funding. I mean, on the grant front, I agree with Drew 100%. You learn how to tell your story depending on which grant you're writing. The story remains truthful always, but it can have many different, you can tell your own story in many different ways. And in doing that exercise of rewriting your story, you become much better at finding what's essential to you and to your organization and to your community. And yeah, I mean, once you are there, it becomes, how would they say, it becomes fluent. You can talk in a way that is much clearer to everybody, not only in your grant writing, but to your donors and to your audience. And that brings more support in terms of donations, individual donations, and donations from private foundations as well. There have been many foundations stepping up to cover the gap that seems to be starting to happen right at the federal level. So yeah, all of the above, collaborate and write grants in order to refine your skill at telling your essential story is critical. And then on the financial side, I see that state endowments are giving grants still. Arts councils not so much because they get the funding from the federal level, but and then it goes down to individuals but that will always be there. That has always been there, right? Individual donations, but now perhaps more important than ever, donations from private foundations. And then there are nuances to each organization. There may be something that, you know, because of what you do or what where you are, you can apply for new grants that you didn't have the time to write before. So in the case of Music Mountain, with 120 acres, 6 buildings, and so on, we are actually taking care of the buildings and finding funding for that. Now that the National Endowment for the Arts, for example, may be supporting less new projects as it was before. So yeah, we keep searching in order to remain sustainable and to survive.
Marna, I'm curious to hear from you. Princeton University concerts on campus. What's the vibe like? What are things that you're hearing, and how are some of these changes and threats to funding affecting how you plan and are able to plan?
Yeah, I feel like I'm living a little bit in the upside down world, right? You know, where I'm used to being, and I'm leading an organization that's in its 131st season, and you know, primarily we are sustained by endowment. You know, uh, people who had incredible foresight many years ago and put money aside for what we do, and that has always been our primary source of funding. So we have been relatively shielded from some of the you know um, back and forth of having to do the kind of grassroots fundraising that Oskar and Drew are talking about. But as I was saying to my colleagues before the session started, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've learned more about the way Princeton University is funded than I ever knew in 15 years. And it really is an unprecedented an unprecedented moment, because Princeton is being threatened in every area of support that comes into the university. So it's not just the federal grants, which everybody has talked about, and the federal research grants that, of course, come to all universities and affect everybody across the board. But it's also about the bill that is currently in Congress and looks like it will be voted on, that will raise the tax on endowments from 1% to somewhere between 14 and 21% is what I'm hearing, which is you know, an enormous increase in taxation and decrease in obviously in funds that fund all sorts of programs at universities. And then there's the question of tuition, which is very much related to all the discussions that are going on now about international students at universities. So I'm at an institution where we're being asked to look 3, 4, 5 years out and make big cuts to our budgets, and to anticipate all sorts of models that could come to us. And my sense is that this is not temporary like COVID was, that this is permanent, that institutions like Princeton University in general will contract. And um, you know, I think the ripple effects will be felt across every level of our work. And I'm really nervous. We're at the very beginning. I have no idea what that will look like, but it does feel unprecedented. And what I'm trying to tell myself is that this is not a time to retreat, that it's a time to rise. That as leaders and administrators, we have to draw on the same creative courage that we ask of the artists that we present, to push back, to speak up, to find new solutions. And as everybody's been talking about, storytelling, to talk about why art matters. And, you know, at the end of the day, it feels like what's at stake right now is about a lot more than funding. It's about the world that we want to live in, and the role of the arts, and the role that the arts can play in shaping a compassionate and connected society. The arts are fundamentally about empathy and about listening and understanding and imagining the lives of others. And in a world that feels increasingly divided and desensitized, it feels like our work is not optional, it's essential. Um, and I think it is an opportunity as well. As scary it is, it's an opportunity, and we have an obligation to ensure that the arts remain a vital force when the world needs it the most. And I think we did see some of that during COVID. I certainly, it felt like audiences came back into the concert hall much clearer than they had ever been about the role that the arts play in their lives. But this feels even more existential. So we're all in it together, and thank God we're creative people. We work in a creative field, but we need to marshal all of that and use it.
When you talk about this kind of mobilization and this optimistic look, and really coming together, it's something we're thinking about a lot at CMA. We've listened and heard from so many of our members across the country wanting to gain new advocacy skills. And we're actually going to Washington, D.C. In 2 weeks to advocate for arts education funding. As you may or may not know, the current skinny bill that's being proposed by the administration has a 22% reduction in anything that isn't defense spending. And that includes a 15% reduction in education, which leads to over 50 billion in a shortfall there. So we are working tirelessly to figure out how to create advocacy tools that we can share with our members so that they can work at the community level to advocate for things that they believe in. And it's interesting when you talk about community engagement and working at the community level, because so many people on this call do that. I would love to hear how you all define success when it comes to your engagement efforts at the community level. Does it go beyond attendance? What does mutual investment look like? Oskar, why don't you go first?
Sure. I mean, it's sometimes hard to tell. I mean, if I were not to think that I just wrote a grant and I need to answer those questions in my report, I would say long term. I mean, I want to see 20 years later somebody come to the concert and say, "Oh, I attended that family concert. That was amazing. It made me go into music. Then I dropped out and I ran the management, or I go to every concert, or I support the arts." That to me is the real success, right? That it was impactful and it made people's lives better. Short term is really hard to measure. That's why we resort to saying, giving numbers on attendance, giving numbers on, well, actually beyond numbers, right? We also give feedback. So what kind of feedback or positive feedback did we get from everybody involved? I'm talking about like children, concerts for children that we do, or family concerts, or other types of concerts that we may do, or education programs for the community. The impact that we have, it's also measured from feedback, and that's where I would stop. I mean, to me, the real thing is what I said first, right? 20 years later, whose lives were changed by those programs? I wish to know. Sometimes we cannot know short term.
Marna, how about you in your presenting life at Princeton?
Yeah, I mean, I think community engagement is the real work. It's not about curation and presenting concerts. It's really, really about engagement. And the music is not the problem, right? Chamber music is for everyone. But the challenge is getting people through the door, and that is really where the work begins. And I feel like engagement is so much more than just putting musicians on stage and hoping that people show up. I think there was a time when that worked really well, but it certainly doesn't work now. And so thinking about how to reimagine the role of music and musicians in public life and designing experiences that invite participation, experiences that extend a hand to those who feel like the world of chamber music isn't a party that they've been invited to. And I am quoting that. That is a direct quote. I like to say it by Clemency Burton Hill. She's a wonderful, I see some people shaking their head, wonderful journalist who we've worked with in the last couple of years, an amazing person who wrote a great book. If you haven't read it, I totally recommend it. It's called The Year of Wonder, and it's a piece of music every single day to listen to, and it's gorgeous. But yeah, to find ways for people to make their own personally relevant connection to what we're doing. And I think the goal is not just building audiences, it's build belonging, right? To build belonging. And I don't know, in the last few years, we just have completely rethought our mission. We really did think of ourselves first and foremost as concert presenters and curators and bring the artists. And if you build it, they will kind of come mentality. And we have really shifted that to think about a broader mission, like not just being about performance, but being about connection and designing those experiences to create that connection. And we've done that in all sorts of ways, but I think ultimately for presenters, that is the most important work that we do.
Drew, I'm curious from your vantage point as a performer and also working with SouthArts and working with artists that you're granting. What are you seeing? What are some definitions of success in community engagement models, and what have you seen artists do that inspire you?
One of the things we look at is reciprocity. Did the community really feel seen and heard in some of these community engagement things, in line with what Marna was saying? It's being invited to the process as well as the product, and there's several different ways that can show up. It could show up in at Jazz Road, for our granting, we don't fund community engagement, but community engagement activities increase your competitiveness in the grant process. So it's definitely something that is valued. And that's just the way the grant was set up. But what we're looking at is like, okay, great. They went into the school in the area locally. They worked with some of the students. They helped them understand the process. It could take that shape. That also, when you do that, guaranteed that you will increase the engagement at your actual show, turning those students and then their families into audience, right? Another way could be Q&As. Another way could be connecting with a local school or after school organization and allowing identifying some students in that space that could perform a tune with you. Having auditions. Some of the more creative ones, they actually had auditions in the cities that they were going in, video auditions, reached out to teachers and said, hey, if you guys want to play with these artists that are coming in town, just send in a video of you jamming over some changes. And so many people did that. And then and the thing about that is that not only are you helping those students feel seen, but whenever you do anything with your community members, they're going to call all their friends. Or if they're students, they're going to call their parents are going to call all their friends. And so now you sort of garnered this extra support and sort of this extra buffer of people that sort of can help you just by helping them be a part of the process. So I think that's one of the things that when we see that's what we look for. When we see that, we're like, well, that's real community engagement. Just a Q&A at the end of a show, it's fine, but it's definitely not the highest level of community engagement. You're not really getting them into the process other than through a Socratic method of just saying, hey, here's our process. You're not really showing them. They're not feeling anything. They're not experiencing it. Open sound checks are also pretty cool and fun, especially if you identify programs, again, going back to either students or community groups who have budding musicians who are adults. I know another organization did their program specifically to deaf community because they had a lot of experience with, or they were impacted by deafness in their life or in their family. So they had these haptic ways of doing it. I'm not going to go ahead and display my ignorance by trying to say exactly what the science was behind what they were doing, but there was what they did was specifically to engage this community on their level. And so I think a lot of that is meeting people on their level. And it's just really about that reciprocity and helping people be part of the process and not just, hey, here's our product, consume the product, and we hope that you go out and share that.
That's amazing. I mean, from CMA's perspective, I mean, artists are so central to all of our programming. We design programs with their input. We try to provide platforms for them to lead, whether it's a webinar, a grant panel, or peer review. And I'm curious, just an open question to the panel, what roles do artists play in your communities in terms of shaping and leading some of those engagement strategies? How much of it is kind of a plug and chug, like we have this structure and a group will come in and do it? How much of it is really creative in terms of how it's deployed, the locations that you're going, just kind of this and that? I'll leave that open and anyone can respond on the panel.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in if I may. Yeah, so by thinking outside of the box, I mean, you start a conversation and you see what people want or what people are passionate about in your community. Just to give you an example, so we came up with this program we called Painting Music. And in Painting Music, there are two parts. And first, we improvise music. And then we improvise basically based on traces that some artists may draw. And we kind of, go back and forth. The music improvised as a reaction to traces on the canvas, and then traces on the canvas or painting in response to performances. So it has that kind of duality in this program. That program has really engaged a lot of people in our community, and it is led by local artists who happen to live near Music Mountain. So, ways like that can be really effective. That has been our experience there to share.
I mean, I'll just jump in and say, I wish it were easier to get to get that kind of collaboration with artists. Maybe we just work in a side of the business that has a lot of guardrails built in, working with managers and working with musicians who are busy and touring lots of places, and you don't always get to have those one-on-one conversations. I do think it's incredibly important that we find artists who will work as collaborators and will come into the community and will invest in whatever you're doing as much as we are. Coming out of the pandemic, knowing that we were returning to the concert hall and that everybody had changed and was a little bit different, we wanted to make sure that we didn't just go back to business as usual. And one of the things that we did was created a brand new series called Music and Healing. And it's totally different than a straight concert series. It's kind of a deeply human-centered series that explores music's capacity to heal, to comfort, to connect, and to transform in times of individual and collective need of all kinds. And it's been really interesting to figure out how to curate it and how to figure out who the artists are who are willing to sit on stage and open themselves up that way. And it's actually one of the beautiful things that the series does is it kind of takes away that sense that, these artists are things to, these amazing stars that come on stage and just wow everybody. They're actually human beings. And figuring out who's willing to talk about what makes them human and what they've gone through has been a completely different experience than any other series we've ever curated. And so I don't know. I just say that, like, I don't think our business is really, really well set up for that kind of activity. And it feels like we've been successful. We've been able to find those artists, and we've done it in all sorts of untraditional ways, but we've had to maybe swim upstream a little bit.
Yeah, if I could add to that, trying to figure out how to say this. We all of these are such great ideas. They're great concepts. What we're looking for in artists, what we think artists are going to need. But I went to conservatory and I go and I speak in conservatories, and honestly, I have to say that I don't think that higher education in general. I don't want to pinpoint conservatories. That wouldn't be fair. But music education at the higher level is not preparing kids for this world. It's unfortunately not. I mean, you go and I'll say this too, is that musicians currently, I believe, and I've only had very few instances to prove this wrong. Musicians are the worst audience to play for, the absolute worst audience to play for. These are people who will be the first people to ask me for comp tickets or free CDs and then sit in the front row like this. Yeah, I heard him play that lick before. Yeah, I don't know, man. He's playing this stuff. You know what I mean? They just sit there and they vibe you the whole time, and you're just like, and then they walk out or they don't want to come. So, and I feel like that starts really in the university. I mean, we're not getting kids out to play for people, to play for humans, to realize that what connects people to our music is not the scales. It's not playing a million miles per hour. You do if I can play fast. I've been in drum corps my entire life. I have chops for days. If I have found that if I play fast all for a whole gig and I'm just ripping it up, I'm literally only pleasing myself. Everybody else, it just gets boring. It's like, what are you doing? Because the things that connect people are love and loss and suffering and sacrifice and connection. And these are the things that matter. And you can do that with 4 notes. You don't need all 12 all the time, you know? And the challenge is that we're in these schools, they have these juries and they're always playing for other musicians, and they're playing for like, okay, they're playing for people with checkboards. And then we're like, well, okay, now what we'd like you to do is go out and connect with humans who couldn't care any less about the same things that you've cared so much about. Not to say that those things aren't important. They have to be able to play at the highest level, to be able to play one note in the right spot at the right time when it's called for in the right way. So I'm not saying that that should be gone. However, there needs to be, at this point, if this is going to survive, I truly believe, this is my opinion, not the opinion of SouthArts or Jazz Row, but I truly believe that what needs to happen is that we need to get kids playing for humans right from the beginning. There's people who know nothing more than they're walking on the way to work. Get them busking. Let them learn tunes that people love and care about. Let them get a little bit of that musical therapy. Help them learn how to be good people so that they can go on tour and people will hire them more because they're not jerks on tour. These things are so essential. Yes, they have to learn to play their instrument at a high level. Yes. Do they have to learn to play it at the highest possible level? No, they really don't, because honestly, the people that are paying for tickets are not other musicians who care about that at all. It is people who just want catharsis. They just want to escape. They just want to feel something. They just want to escape from all of this stuff. But we send them for 4 or 6 or 8 years to just know how to play that instrument, to play for other musicians, and send them out and expect them to know how to play for people who couldn't care less. And I think that that's a big problem that needs to be addressed in our field going forward.
That's a mic drop moment, Drew.
I was gonna say, I totally agree. And I think that if you cannot find those artists who can kind of reach across the divide and make people see their soul, you know, that's really what it's about. Like, that is the thing that makes audiences come back. And if you can't do that,
Yeah, and
no one's going to want to come back.
yeah, and teach them how to be good audience members. Teach them how to be supportive. Like, if somebody's coming through town, I feel like it is incumbent upon me, if I'm at all able, to go and support that artist if I got an extra $20 or an extra $30, to not ask for a free ticket, to not ask for a free CD, to not do that. And just and even, and this sounds so simple, but the amount of artists who just won't share because they feel like they have the social media capital that they can't share your stuff and it might take away from their stuff is, again, that scarcity mindset. So it's like, if students can't learn during that process to be great audience members, to be supportive in that primary time, and that is just as important as what you do on stage, is how you support others in the audience, how you support them with your words. And this all goes back to like this competitive idea that there's not enough people, there's not enough money, there's not enough, and there's plenty if you just are authentic about what you do and you learn to support everybody else in the community. And it's not being taught, and we're expecting artists just to know how to do it.
Sorry, Ed, maybe we're going down a rabbit hole, but I'll just add one more thing, which is just that we are all in this together, because I think we have to teach the audience the same kind of etiquette. You know, I find myself constantly, it's not just about like turning your cell phones off. It's also, you know, helping audiences realize that they are part of the performance, that when they're sitting there and watching a performer, the performer can see them, they can feel them, they can hear everything that they're doing. They can, you know, they live off that energy, and that you know, that quality of listening affects the quality of the performance as well. And so you know, when things are the best, everybody's doing their part.
This is an exciting topic, and I saw so many heads nodding, and we personally know there's some incredible educators and advocates for this kind of work on this call, top, really. And so I think it makes sense to kind of shift the conversation into this idea of storytelling and connecting more authentically with communities, what that means, what are some of those characteristics. And so I'd like to ask the panel if you can describe a time or an instance when storytelling really shifted the perspective of an audience member, a stakeholder, a funder. And what was the story? What was that human element that connected someone to finally say, I get it. I get what this is all about. I'm wondering if you could all share something, an example of that.
Sure, I think I could start. I think I understand what you're looking for. One of the programs that we funded built their work. It was a cross sector sort of grant about environmental impact, and it was a work that was based on that. It was called From the Earth, and what she did a lot of legwork in getting these interviews and these stories from people who were in places that were dealing with climate change on a very real level, impacted every day. Just how many trucks drive through, and how if you leave your windows open, their entire living room would be covered with soot. You know, like that's how impactful. It's not like some sort of maybe nebulous thing like, well, the ozone, or that we can't quite comprehend. But it was like all of these real stories of people who were like, yeah, every kid here has inhalers in the nurse's office. It's not, and she used these stories to build the suite around all of these stories. And I think, and she plays the recordings of the interviews from people who've been around for at different ages, from kids who were talking about how they can't go out and play outside from the hours of this to this, or they can only stay outside 20 minutes in this town in Detroit because of X, Y, you know, or the town in, I think it was Michigan, but whatever town it happened to be in. But there was all these wonderful stories, and when you hear them, along with, of course, great music that was made and the harmonic structure that went along with the storytelling, it felt almost cinematic. But it was happening in front of you live, and it was really a beautiful thing. And it really has connected with. It took a while, but now I know she's getting a lot of impact, a lot of momentum, and she's really connecting and starting to really move forward. So I thought that was a great way to, you know, bring it forward and not lecture people. Like, it's such a great project, and I feel like some of those projects, especially when you talk about things like that, can come off lectury and preachy, you know, if you're not careful and if it's not coming from a place of earnestness. And I think that this was just one of those great examples of something that came off as wonderful music first, like it was great music. Oh, and also I'm leaving here thinking about, man, people really have to live like that. I don't. I'm so grateful. What can I do, or how can I make sure that doesn't happen to my community? Sort of on the back end, right? But we heard the great music, and some people who just wanted to come in. Oh, and she also partnered with, at every concert, there's booths out front of different environmental organizations from that local area that are there with booths and information for people who, when they walk in. So it's like all this whole 360-degree way of introducing people at different entry points to both the music and also to environmental consciousness on these various ways. It was pretty cool.
I'm so glad you shared that. It sounds like a sonic memoir, taking people's stories, combining it with music in a creative way. It builds empathy. We've done some creative engagement projects like that as well, and we've seen incredible spikes in people's empathy, interest in things that they didn't feel like they may be interested in beforehand. Marna, Oskar, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I will be brief because to me, it's at the micro level. The days when somebody comes on the stage and performs and leaves are, I think, are no more. I mean, we really have to connect with the audience. We do that with the performance, of course, but we also have to speak to the audience. And they feel so much more engaged and welcome. They see we are a human, and they connect much more. They enjoy the performance much more. So what I have seen, so at the micro level, is that just by just saying something, even something silly, a tiny story of your way to Music Mountain, anything makes a huge difference. So my point here is, it doesn't have to be, a remarkable story. It's all about connecting. It's all about showing your human side.
Marna.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would mostly point to the series I was just talking about, the Music and Healing Story series, where there have just been incredible connections made ever since we started it. But in the first year, we focused on the role of music in healing from traumatic illness. And we had one really remarkable program with the pianist John Batiste and his wife, Suleika Jouaud, who is a Princeton alum and a remarkable writer herself, and has this just dramatic and incredibly heart-rending story that she was diagnosed almost as soon as she graduated from Princeton with leukemia, and has now been through it 3 times, and has had three or two, maybe two bone marrow transplants. She's written about it a lot in her books and her column in the New York Times. She's an amazing person. But the two of them really, really came to our community and shared of themselves in a really beautiful way. And one of the things that we are always thinking about with that series is how can we extend the subjects and the conversation that comes up in those events outside of the concert hall. And one of the things we did was partnered with an organization called Be the Match, which is an organization that swabs people's cheeks for bone marrow matches. And it really, like, I didn't think I would ever be able to say this in my career, but it really felt like the concert was saving lives. You know, we had people lined up outside the concert hall as soon as the concert was over to the event. It was not really a concert, has talking and all sorts of stuff, but you know, to be swapped. And it's just profound, really profoundly moving. At the same time, you know, we did also that year did a program on anxiety and depression with the pianist Jonathan Biss and the writer Adam Hazlett. And afterwards in the Q&A, and there's always some kind of Q&A as part of the event, a student, an undergrad, got up and basically said, you know, that he had been really suffering from depression all year long and had never talked about it, and was afraid to talk about it, and hadn't told his friends or his colleagues or a doctor or anyone, and that he felt the courage to do that immediately, you know, following that event. So a lot of things like that have come out of that series, which is one of the things I really appreciate about it, is that it has just created a space for reflection and really highlighted the role that music plays in our everyday lives in super profound ways.
Thank you so much for sharing. You know, it's hard, I think, because these stories are so heartfelt and they're real. I mean, we're talking about human impact, the impact of our art form when framed in very specific ways. And then the other side of that, something much more technical. It's like, how do we describe that in a quantitative way to make a stronger case for funding or for support? I'm curious what types of metrics all of you use, which metrics matter most to your organizations. And then how do you balance that, again, technical side with your own organizational values, your own artistic values, the things that we're talking about right now? That seems like a tricky balance, and I'm really curious to hear from all of you about that.
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that totally. I mean, data is interesting. I'm so all about the intangibles. So when I'm asked to just look at, well, how many people applied, you know, how many quality people applied? Well, that's also subjective. So how many people that were really doing great projects versus, like, are we just trying to, like, justify the need for this because 300 people applied? Technically, aren't we all kind of trying to put ourselves out of business? You know, if we're successful, if we're, like, really truly successful, isn't that the whole goal? So do we want, you know, so having to say, like, no, look, there's still a need for this because 400 people are applying, versus, look, it's doing great, only 150 people are applying now because other people perhaps have gone on to create more sustainable careers, or that's something that's more happening, is always something that I struggle with. So I kind of rely on those who've been in this industry a lot more to let me know which pieces of data to sort of put forth. But personally, for me, I've worked for companies where all that mattered were the numbers. I was a cultural arts director for a city, which was run by a company, and really what they were doing was gentrifying, and I didn't realize it at the time. And so I thought we were redeveloping. So there was these projects that I was pushing forward that they would put me in front of city council to talk about, and be great and get all the support, then literally on the way out, you'd be like, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this instead because we just want to get numbers. So instead of bringing quality music that reflected the community that this performing arts venue is in, it was like, yeah, but more people will come if we just have a card game and serve free liquor. I kid you not. That is a direct quote. And it's like, or we could bring world-class artists that came from the same soil that the students in the 300-person marching band next door with only one teacher have, and we can get that jazz band to engage. It's like, right, but for us to get our next contract in the next city, we have to show this and this. So I lasted there about 7 months. But you know, so it's always the back and forth between which data is really, really important and to who. And then the question we have to ask, do we want money from people who only care about certain levels of data? And if we don't take it, you know, what does that mean? Will that be something that is positive for, you know, because also my father used to say this all the time, you can't help the poor by becoming one of them, you know, and I think about that in all sorts of areas of my life. Take out the monetary aspect, you can apply it anywhere where we have to be sustained so that we can support the venue, the arts or whoever we're trying to support. But at the same time, we don't want to lose our soul in the process. And I wish I had I gave you no answer, but the answer is, here's some more questions for you.
Those are the best inquiries. Oskar, I'm curious, you know, what metrics matter most to your organizations, plural?
I mean, to answer that, actually, we usually start very big. I mean, we want to change the world. We want to change people. We want to make this a better world to live in. And we believe truly that we can do that through music. So that always is the starting point. So we start just big as need be, right? We are all very optimistic and very much believing that what we do can make this a better world to live in, right? So that's the starting point, front and center. Then in terms of the data, so 180 degrees to the end of this, usually attendance and just showing that we are sustainable. I mean, organizations like NEA and others, I mean, that's a very clear criterion, but it's kind of common sense, right? So if you have an organization that has been carrying deficits 3 years in a row, it feels like, well, maybe they have to do a little restructuring or just become sustainable, in this case, financially, before they can take on their next huge project. I mean, again, I think that thinking outside of the box and even with a big project can allow them to achieve just that. But yes, sustainability, attendance, those are very important metrics for us when we apply for grants. But we always tie it to how we are changing the lives of the people in our community, how we are connecting with them. And so if attendance is going up, we will tie it to that. If we are sustainable, well, maybe that's a longer stretch. But always tying it to the big picture. Always write the grants very, very passionately, and then tone it down.
Thank you. Marna?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I have more questions than answers, and also, you know, I mean, data does, in a lot of people's eyes, provide credibility. It, you know, numbers demonstrate impact, and that's the reason why we're asked that, right, in a grant application. So whether it's attendance figures or ticket revenue or audience demographics or student engagement, you know, that those are measurable things. At the same time, I think we have to acknowledge it's really, really hard to access data for lots of reasons. I think nationally it's super hard. It's one of the reasons why CMA is really important. And the service organizations are all important in kind of gathering that data and sharing it. It's also really hard just in our own communities. I mean, we have a lousy ticket system and it's not getting any better, and like pulling the data out of that is really, really hard. And we're all working in these, even the biggest organizations are working with such small staffs, with such small resource, you know, and figuring out how to like find people who can spend the time pulling that data out. is really, really challenging. So that goes into the question bucket of just acknowledging that data is important and also acknowledging that it's hard to get at. But it does show that chamber music is it's not just surviving, it's mattering. And then I also think that it relates to the previous conversation about storytelling, which is that the data is not enough. Like, it's the storytelling that makes the case human. So yeah, I guess I'm in the bucket of adding more questions than answering them.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Something we talk about at CMA when we are going through our data and trying to make decisions and good decisions, is that metrics must serve meaning and not the other way around. That's super important to us. We want to make sure that that is consistent, and it's challenging to be able to hold up to your own values and answer those questions that come from funders and other stakeholders. This conversation has just gone by too quickly. It's really, really inspiring and amazing to hear from all of you. And I think I'm getting a message that we should move into Q&A, because I think we have a really dynamic group of members here on the call, each with their own incredible insights and experiences. And why don't we turn this into a dialogue? So if anyone has a question, I mean, I think maybe I'll pass it to Julie and Susan, my colleagues, to kind of look through some of the questions that have come through, and then the panel can answer them.
Hey, Kevin, while they do that, I'll kill time by talking about one of the other things that you mentioned, which was building trust, which I think is really important. And it kind of dovetails from a lot of the other topics we talked about. But I think one of the questions that you had presented was about building trust with communities that don't see themselves reflected in traditional concert programming. And I think that, that's both for classical and for jazz. And I think that the fundamental ideas on how to do that don't really revolve. I think, honestly, I think it's the kind of programming is irrelevant. And I think the way you build trust is through sacrifice, right? I mean, is again, by showing up. If you think about anybody who, it's by commitment and being there. And the commitment, let me start this again. I think it's by showing a commitment to those communities, and those communities, the commitment will only have value if there's sacrifice. That's where the commitment finds its value. So if there's nothing you're sacrificing, and that could be a sacrifice of your social media capital, posting as much as you can, showing up to their events in their communities that they're putting on by people in those communities on a consistent and regular basis, because especially if they don't see themselves reflected in you, when you show up, they're going to be skeptical, likely, overgeneralization, but likely there'll be some skepticism. But when you continue to show up without asking for anything, without getting anything, you're not running for office, you're just showing up because you want to support and you're bringing new people out. That shared sacrifice, and then you're sharing that sacrifice by putting something into it, by investing into it without wanting anything back, and not co-opting the stories, right? So not saying, okay, this is a community that we know was caught on fire back in 18 this, and they're still rebuilding, or 19 this, are still rebuilding. So I'm going to write a piece, and I'm going to be at the center of it, and I'm going to write this thing and watch my cool music built on their sense of sacrifice, as opposed to propping up somebody from that community, helping them to gain the skills necessary to be able to do that. And then also, showing up before you show art is one of the things we like to say. You show up before you show art. So you show up as much as possible, again, being great audience members, being integral in that community. And if that's not something you're willing to do, then maybe that's not the community that you need to be trying to push your art into, because they won't trust you. No matter how good your art is, and no matter how urban it is, and no matter how many hip hop beats you put behind your violin, they're not going to show up. So I think that it's really important that there's that shared sacrifice, there's that commitment. That commitment is shown through sacrifice, and there's consistency, and that we're showing up. And then at that point, we're allowing that input and feedback from them and what we've learned by showing up and sacrificing to inform the kind of art that we want to present within that community. And we're building up those artists and using them. So me bringing a bunch of New York artists down to rural Alabama is one thing, but me showing up in rural Alabama, spending time there consistently over the course of a year or two, finding artists that I love in rural Alabama with those stories to tell through their music, and using those people to play that same art, even if it's my music, is going to go much further than just, here, look at this gift we have to bestow upon you. And it was something that I learned that the hard way by I was touring Mexico and doing clinics. No, I'm sorry, Costa Rica. And man, I went there thinking that I was going to just show them all these things. And my clinic was like this basic nonsense. And then they played for me, and I was like, oh, you guys are amazing. And I just talked about quarter note lengths And I was so embarrassed, and they said nothing. But I realized that I had that sense of sort of American exceptionalism kind of burned into me. And I'm glad I learned it on the first date on the tour. Let's just put it that way. But I think that those things are just really important. And I'm really glad that you asked that question and just wanted to sort of speak on it a little bit. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Drew. Something that came up in the chat was referencing, how to story tell during this time, but I kind of wanted to connect that to something that I've been thinking about hearing you speak, and on this topic of the future. When we have times like right now where things are uncertain and people are feeling uneasy, and you're thinking about your storytelling at this time and your essence, like why you are essential, which you've addressed in this panel in many different ways. How much should we be thinking about the future? How much should we be planning for the future and thinking about what is the ultimate goal? What is it that we really want? What do we want chamber music to be like when we're in a situation right now where we have to be reactive? So I'm just curious if you'd be able to speak on that. Like, how are you splitting your brains? Because Marna, you mentioned that you have to budget for 3 more years and figure that out. So it's an interesting thing to have to continue your operations, but have this sense of urgency right now. And just want to hear your thoughts on that and what you recommend to our members. No one wants to go.
Like, since you mentioned my name, I should go, but I'm not. It does feel like such an uncertain time. I'm really not sure what to say about it. Because that it seems like we've been presented with so many different scenarios that there are 5 very, very different ways that things could look in 5 years from now. I think I'm gonna, at an organization that's been here for 131 years, I feel the weight of that history all the time, every day. And um, I I think we have to respect why we were created and why we were brought to life, and what came before us, but we also have to relate to the world as it is now, and we have to think about innovating and surprising people. I mean, I will say, one of the things that really, really scares me and makes me sad about the idea that things are gonna maybe get harder and not easier is that is not getting smaller, because I've been here for 15 years, and when I got here, we had 8 concerts a year and our budget was $250,000, and now we're doing 35 events a year, and our budget is $1.5 million. So I've seen our organization at lots of different sizes, and there are, so we've been, I feel like we've been great at all those sizes. So we can do any of that, but it does worry me that that what I don't want to take is our spirit away, and our ability to innovate. And we're small and we're nimble, but part of what has always been a characteristic is wanting to make things better, wanting to improve things, wanting to do new things, wanting to surprise people, wanting to keep that element of innovation. And anything that leads towards, like, just do the same thing year after year is not good, right? So um I think I haven't quite figured out a way to say it, so I don't feel like I'm expressing it perfectly, but it's that, like, I just want to make sure that we retain our spirit regardless of what size we are, and that we find ways to you know imbue everything that we're doing with creativity and thoughtfulness.
Great, really appreciate that. I'm not seeing much in the chat right now. So I'm wondering if the panelists, and maybe Kevin, I'm wondering what you think. What are you looking forward to this year? Or what do you think is the thing that is exciting coming up for you that you're working on. Because like I was mentioning, there's the right now where people are getting very reactive and stuck in, but there's plenty of good things happening too.
Is that a panel question or is that for Kevin?
For everyone. Sorry.
Oh, I mean, I'm always trying to get people to give me lots of money just for being me. It's kind of like it's kind of my whole goal. So I'm always, but I think I think what's really key moving forward is that I believe that authenticity is going to be more and more rewarded as AI starts to do more AI things. So the more authentic you can be in your music, the more you can bring you into your music. And it sounds like something everyone technically does, but at least I know in my own practice that it's harder and harder every time I get on stage and this urge comes on me to play lots of notes because that's, impress the people with my hand speed. And then I'm just like, no, just play notes that matter. Just play the right notes in the right, or just play notes that mean something to you. Make this thing mean something, like play from a place of joy. So I know for me, my practice before performing, like right before performing, is I have this album specifically, like my good vibes before performance. It's just pictures of my kids and pictures of my family having a great time. And I'm like, oh, right. Like my why is really deep. And I think it's really important for people to understand their why. Like my why is so that people who play the vibraphone after me, who fall in love with this stupid instrument that costs too much money and you can't put picture frames on and is hard to move around, like those kids will have an easier time than I did. And my why is that my kids need to know that they can do whatever they want if they choose to and make a living. And I choose to continue to do this because it brings me joy. And I think this world is going to need more and more people who are doing things that light them on fire so that they can spread it. And I think the goal is to say, how can we make our little corner of the world, like how can we spread joy and make it the people we interact with feel better, act better, be better, whatever the case is. And I'm excited to really dig into that work. And I think I've gotten away from it a little bit in the past. And I do feel some of the things that I was saying, even as I sit here and say, should I say this thing? I should say more contrived answers that people want to hear. And then I'm like, no, I'm just going to say this stuff and hopefully CMA will invite me back. And if they don't, I mean, my kids still love me, and that's pretty cool. So I think that authenticity, the work of being more authentic, like really digging into what do I love, what brings me joy. And I found out that when I'm really honest about it, like, oh, yeah, that brings you joy too. Okay, cool. When I play this fun thing that makes me happy to play, you also. And then some people are like, well, that sucks. And I'm like, great. Now it's so easy to figure out, like, let me just focus on delighting the people that I delight. But when we try to play the social media game of getting massive numbers, man, I mean, like, and the AI game of like just flattening the curve of everybody's specialness, I think that's going to be a losing game. And I think the more we can dig into saying, forget about the numbers. If I have 100 people, I'm going to make those 100 people who come, or those 2 people, like so happy that when they leave, next time will be 4 people and next time will be 6 people. And just thinking about that in that moment and just bringing joy to the people who are in your immediate circle. And if that's our goal, we can do nothing but grow because joy spreads. And we know that. Like we have scientific evidence that happiness will spread itself. It's just, are we patient enough in a world that is trying so hard to make us not patient, to want everything right now, everything without work, everything without sacrifice? Are we willing to do that deep work on ourselves to really figure out what makes us special? And so it's been exciting work for me to be able to do that. And I do think that work is showing up with my Jazz Road work. I think that work is showing up in my music. It didn't show up at Atlanta Jazz Fest last week, unfortunately. I don't think personally. Everyone else who saw it thought they did. I didn't think so. I was pretty upset with it. But I wasn't upset because I played bad notes. Everyone was like, man, the notes were great. And I'm like, oh, thanks. I was upset because I feel like I just played for other people. Like I was playing my conservatory mindset. I wasn't playing like just because stuff I wanted to play, So I get to try again next week. So I'm excited to do that. So for me, the future is more about that digging deeper into authenticity. I do use AI. I do use AI an awful lot to help me figure out, like, take a whole evaluation and pare it down to what I need to understand. But then from that point, am I relying on it, or am I looking at that data and being authentic about how I want to interpret it? So in everything, that's always the question that I'm asking. And that work is what kind of excites me about the future, because I think it's going to be more important than ever before.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Dady, and I work here at CMA. I know most of you, and I'm just wondering, I'm hearing a lot of things about, we talked a little bit about data, and data is very transactional, and data can tell stories. But in terms of our own communities, Marna, you have a university community. Oskar, you have a number of communities. And Drew, you're in a number of different communities as well. So how do you bring these relationships together and foster these relationships and over time? Just curious. Okay.
Yeah,
Oscar,
that's a
great.
great question, Susan. I don't know if, oh, should I maybe wait? Okay. So I think that's a really great question. How we do that. Um, I mean, just to use a term we have floated in today's meeting, being true to your values, being yourself, being who you are. I think there are a lot of threads that connect everything that each of us does. So, for example, I mean, I even when I put on my curator cap, I mean, I am still a teacher. I'm still a performer. So there are many things that are in common. And I think to be even more specific, just to mention one, so communicating is at the forefront always. So I'm always thinking of ways of how to communicate with my audience when I'm in the stage. And then let's put now the festival curator cap on. So how can I communicate more meaningfully with our mailing list, with all the people in our community that is listed in our database? Why only 40% of people open those newsletters? Why only 50% of people come to the concerts? So how can I do better there? And still with the summer festival cap on. So how can we bring new people? And oftentimes that means, well, it starts at the board level. You bring new board members and their circles, but also you explore the partnerships we were talking about, and you also go to where they are. You have to present concerts in unusual venues. You have to partner with non-music organizations and go seek other communities. Let them know about what you do and why what you do is so important. Because some of them may help you actually. It may help you in an amazing new collaboration. Some of them might come to a concert. So that aspect of connection at so many different levels is a common thread in everything that I do, at least.
Susan, I have a slightly more playful answer. But every year for the last 10 years, this was the 10th time we've done it this year, we've done something called our annual Chamber Jam. It started out as a way to bring amateur musicians together with the professionals that were playing on our stage. And it was just an acknowledgement both about the fact that music is such an equalizer and just as its own art form brings so many people together, and also as a way of just kind of celebrating kind of the shared joy that we have over music. And it's been lots of things over the years, but it generally happens after a concert where we invite whatever group of musicians we're focusing on to come bring their instrument to the concert, come on stage after the concert. We invite the artists who have just performed back, and we just sight read a piece of music. No one needs to prepare. There's no judgment. There's no, no standard. Like, let's just try to get through this together. And we've done everything. We've done orchestra, string quartets, vocal stuff, a little bit of everything. This year we pivoted slightly and we did a dance jam, and we partnered with our local American Repertory Ballet company, and we had them make a piece of very, very simple choreography that literally anyone could learn. And in fact, we were able to extend because of the Music and Healing series, we have a relationship with Mark Morse's Dance for Parkinson's Disease program. And so we had done a program with them in the past where they had made choreography for people who had mobility challenges, and so that they could sit or, change the dance slightly so that it would fit them. And so we were able to accommodate everyone in this case. And so instead of bringing instruments on stage afterwards, anyone who wanted to come up and dance could. There was a session like a week in advance if you wanted to learn the choreography, but you didn't have to know it. You could learn it right there on stage. And you know, we had 8-year-olds, we had 80-year-olds, we had people in chairs, we had people in a wheelchair, like a little bit of everything. And you know, that was just such a visible moment of like, how do you bring people together? Well, this was something everyone could do, and it was so inspiring. And so, you know, when I talk about worrying about kind of beating the spirit out of us, I think, you know, we came out of that and thought, oh gosh, we should do an entire series where, you know, we have choreography that goes with the music that's being played throughout the series. And if people throughout the whole year, people want to take a dance lesson 3 times a year, that would be wonderful. You know, helps people experience the music differently as well. And that was true, by the way. We did this with Jess Gillum, who's a UK based saxophone player, really, really wonderful player. And she was so generous, you know, to come back out after giving a long recital and repeat something that she had played on the recital. And you know, I think she heard it differently too when she saw people up there moving to it. So I just give that as a fun and playful example of literally bringing a lot of different people together.
Okay, well, this has been an incredible panel. I just wanted to mention to Julia's question about things that we're excited about. I can speak for the team at CMA. We've gone through so much as a community. When you think about all the things, financial crises and changing politics and COVID. But I think in this moment, there's so much innovation, there's so much openness, there's so much determination to really advocate for our art. It feels stronger than ever. And that's something that I know our team is excited about. These kinds of conversations are super inspiring to see what's happening in the field, how leaders are helping to shape new narratives around this art form and how it will be sustainable in the future. So I'd like to thank our incredible panelists. Thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, and sharing everything you did. And to all of our members, thank you all for joining. Susan, Julia, thank you so much for helping to orchestrate this. And happy National Chamber Music Month.